Constancia is not only one of the coolest climates in South Africa, but as well one of the wettest, but like very wet. You know, when in Stellenbosch we got like 600 millimeters of water, we got almost 1200 in Constancia, which is a lot of water. And most of the wineries focused on Sauvignon Blanc because it's cool, it's wet, and Sauvignon Blanc does perfect. But Steenberg takes the immense risk to go exotic. The Nebbiolo Steenberg, we have a 2017 vintage, wine of origin Constancia. Nebbiolo is an Italian grape, like the name says it, with double B. Nebbiolo is the grapes you find in Piedmont, in the north of Italy, in a very cool climate, very famous for wines like Barolo, Barbaresco, Roero, but as well many of the smaller appellations in Piedmont. Are we very Italian on the Steenberg side? What do you think of that wine, Cathy?
Let's leave the judgment as to whether this is an Italian Nebbiolo for later. If I can just explain what I see in the glass.
Explain this beautiful wine.
So I see it's translucent, and instead of having a red-blue spectrum color, the wine has got a brick red spectrum color for me. It also has a much deeper center of the wine and shows some gradation from an almost watery rim through to garnet, then through to a deeper brick red, slightly tinged with cherry colors in the middle. And that is a typical Nebbiolo color. On the nose, it is not exhibiting sweet fruit at all. So it's not fruity because you can't smell sweetness. But for me, it's not a fruity nose at all. Having said that, there is cherry. But I never associate cherry with being a sweet fruit like a strawberry or a sweet fruit like a ripe peach. To me, a cherry is almost an umami fruit. So there's a cherry aromatic, but it's not very sweet. There's lovely spicing as well on the nose.
I can find some spices.
Spicing.
Yeah.
And like if you've walked through a herb garden, you've avoided brushing your fingers through the lavender, but you've gone through all the other herbs and have brushed your fingers through. And it's just releasing the herb oils into the air. I get a kind of an herby note as well.
But do I find as well a touch of nutmeg?
Yes, nutmeg. Not cinnamon. So
Not cinnamon.
They're not sweet spices.
Oh no, they're not sweet. They're
It's
fairly austere somehow. Huh?
somehow an austere wine, a savory wine that it's smelling like. And then when you put it on the palate, the wine is really dry, or has a really dry impression in terms of residual sugar. It also has very fine but very drying tannins. They're not astringent in that they're mouth puckering, which you can sometimes get from the Italian variety. These are lovely ripe
like
tannins.
a huge acidity that are just jumping on your gums, and yeah.
So I think the acidity in combination with the dry tannins, in combination with the unfruity fruit, so the more savory fruit, is giving an overall impression of dryness on this wine. I think it's a decent attempt here at a Nebbiolo. It's very nice.
It's a very good example. I mean, like you said, color is one of the main clues you can get on Nebbiolo. And yes, it's a light color, and you could get light color on a Grenache, you could get light color on a Pinot Noir. Grenache and Pinot being fairly oxidative, they can turn bricky at a fairly young age. But this gradation of the watery rim and the more intense core, and it's a very young wine, it's been bottled, I mean, that's a current release of Steenberg Nebbiolo. I mean, when you go bricky, you know, you have to think if it's a young wine, and you can see there's still fruit. I mean, there's a lot of cherry on the nose, and almost this cherry that are preserved in alcohol. More
maraschino cherries.
Yes, maraschino cherry, more than the brown serious cherries you can find at Woolworths or Pick n Pays when it's the time of the year, which is very limited for cherries, and fairly recent in South Africa to get access to fresh cherries in that extent. And the austerity of the palate, it's, you can see it's still extremely tannic, much more tannic than any Grenache or Pinot
Would be.
but the granulosity,
Yes.
the texture of the tannins is very refined. There's nothing like a Cabernet Sauvignon that will really, like I use my word, jump on your gums. It's just all around in the wine. It's like it's part of the wine. It's not separated from the wine. But there's enough cherry fruit on the palate to be balanced by that. These wines are supposed to be aging. I mean, the best Barolo and Barbadosco
Oh gosh.
can
20
have
years
20 years,
plus.
sometime more. And you say, when you got a light color like that, you said, this one will never age because it's always almost look like it's been slightly oxidative at the beginning, but don't trust your first impression. These wines are made to benefit and blossom from bottle aging, gain different layers of complexity, getting this nutmeg into different type of spices. We are what we
14.
are, 14 and a half alcohol.
Yes.
It's very ripe. I mean, Constantia is much warmer than the Piedmont. But I think it's a beautiful attempt of getting a very difficult grape. You know, Nebbiolo is a grape often compared with Pinot Noir in terms of nobility. I mean, at least by the Italians.
I'd agree. I'd agree with the Italians.
Okay, so even by Cathy. So we talk about a very delicate grapes, not easy to grow, not easy to make as a winemaker, and we must, put my hats down for Steenberg making such a wine. It's a very interesting wine, but the texture is extremely dry, savory on the finish, and grippy, but not rustic.
That's a very good way of putting it. Grippy, but not
Thank you,
rustic.
mistress.
And, when you look at the wine, that's that horrible triangle, or sometimes it can be a square, where you're trying to evaluate an old wine, whether it is Pinot, Nebbiolo, or Rioja. And the colours can be very similar, except I always think that Nebbiolo has a more orangey tinge than Pinot, which has more cherry as it ages. But that colour, in combination with the cherry, in combination with the acidity and those tannins, can only be Nebbiolo.
Yeah, because the acidity is
there.
It's sharp. It's supporting the tannins, this grippiness. It's not tannins and an overripe wine at all. We look at a lot of freshness in this wine, somehow on the finish.
Absolutely. A very good attempt, as you said.
Well done, Steenberg. Thank you, Cathy.